Hi, and welcome to History Made Simply, your one-stop history hop back in time, where each week we'll be uncovering history's secrets for you. Make sure to like this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for weekly History Made Simply episodes. The Dark History of Easter. Easter is traditionally a joyous occasion when families come together to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the arrival of spring. However, just beneath the surface of colourful eggs, fluffy bunnies, and delectable chocolate goodies lies a lesser known and darker side to the holiday, replete with vampires, pagan goddesses, and ritualistic cannibalism. Today, we journey through the more macabre side of Easter, delving into the pagan roots, supernatural associations, and chilling traditions. Let's take a look at the dark history of Easter. Feasts and holy days set during the spring equinox predate Christianity by thousands of years, as this astronomical occurrence has been recognised in cultures all over the world since, well, basically forever. I mean, who wouldn't celebrate the end of winter and return of light to the world? The early church borrowed Easter's date, and probably the whole eating bread thing, known as communion, from Jews who had been observing Passover since at least the 5th century BC. Though, over in China, people were celebrating New Year's Day in spring long before that. In his 8th century book, The Reckoning of Time, English saint the Venerable Bede mentions an Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring called Easter, for whom apparently the whole month of what we now call April was named, a time of year filled with frolicking and feasting. This view presumes, as does the one which associates the origins of Christmas on December 25th with pagan celebrations of the winter solstice, that early Christians appropriated pagan names and holidays for their highest festivals. However, given the zealotry with which Christians confronted all forms of paganism, this appears to be a rather erroneous assumption. The present consensus actually holds that the word derives from the Christian designation of Easter week from the Latin phrase albus, which was understood as the plural of alba, or dawn, which became Easterum in Old High German. And as English is a Germanic language, this trail leads quite precisely to our modern word. In fact, the Latin and Greek word for Pascha or Passover provides the root for Paques, the French word for Easter. However, fixing the date on which the resurrection of Jesus was to be observed and celebrated triggered a major controversy in early Christianity, which divided the Eastern and Western churches. This started in 195 AD, when Pope Victor I attempted to excommunicate some church followers for thinking Easter should always be celebrated on the 14th day of Paschal, or Passover moon. The fools, huh? They were obviously correct, right? Given our previous explanation. But the resulting dispute was not definitively resolved until our guy, Bede, was writing in the 8th century. Christians in the Near East observed the day of the crucifixion on the same day that Jews celebrated the Passover, on the 14th day of the first full moon of spring. In Western Europe, the resurrection of Jesus was celebrated on the Sunday Jesus had risen from the dead. Consequently, Easter was always celebrated on the first Sunday after April 14th, with the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD decreeing that Easter should be observed on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox on March 21st. Easter can therefore fall on any Sunday between March 22nd and April 25th. Eastern Orthodox churches use a slightly different calculation, based on the Julian rather than the Gregorian calendar, 13 days ahead of the former, meaning Orthodox Easter usually occurs later than its Western counterpart. Moreover, the Orthodox tradition prohibits Easter from being celebrated before or at the same time as Passover. By the 4th century, the Easter Vigil was well established in various liturgical calendars as a joyful anticipation of the resurrection. But while candlelight vigils and masses still form parts of our modern festivities of Easter, how did eggs, bunnies, and chocolate enter the equation? One theory suggests that pre-Christians were into eggs as they considered them a symbol of new life, perfect for a spring equinox feast day. When armies of Catholics invaded and occupied pagan lands, they incorporated parts of pagan culture they could live with, while discarding the parts they couldn't. Christians are thought to have borrowed egg decorating from Persia, where churches in the Levant started dyeing Easter eggs red in memory of the blood shed by Christ during his crucifixion. The trend caught on, and by 1290, English King Edward I ordered 450 eggs decorated with dye and gold leaf and given as gifts to the royal household on Easter. A 1569 Dutch satire critiquing Catholicism during the peak of the Reformation lists decorated eggs as one of the ridiculous practices of the Roman Church, along with candles, icons, palm branches, costumes, and anything fun, it would seem. Just a couple of years later, in 1572, a Catholic priest was tied to a cross in very Protestant Edinburgh and pelted with eggs. When infamous reformer John Knox recounted this incident, it marked the first known use of the English phrase Easter eggs. The first confirmed description of an Easter egg hunt followed in 1682, when physician George Frank von Frankenau, wow, what a mouthful, described children in the Heidelberg hunting for hare's eggs in herb gardens. Which brings us to the notion of that silly Easter rabbit. Remember the Anglo-Saxon spring goddess Easter? Well, she and springtime itself were also associated with rabbits and their prodigious fertility. This gets even crazier when a belief in the purity-obsessed medieval church held that rabbits and hares were hermaphrodites who could reproduce without loss of virginity by laying eggs. This led to an association with the Virgin Mary, with hares occurring in illuminated manuscripts and Northern European paintings of the Virgin and Christ Child. Titian's 1530 Madonna of the Rabbit is painted depicting the Virgin Mary with her hand on a presumably asexually reproductive white rabbit is the best example of this. Pennsylvania Dutch settlers brought the tradition of a sentient rabbit delivering baskets of painted eggs to children across the Atlantic to the United States, with artist Johann Conrad Gilbert painting the first modern depiction of an Easter rabbit in 1800. By 1835, Jacob Grimm of Brothers Grimm fame seemed to have ironically lost the plot while speculating about the connection between female divinity and rabbits. He was probably days from compiling all of those German fairy tales. His speculations were repeated by other authors such as folklorist K.A. Obel, who in 1883 asserted that the goddess Easter freed a frozen bird from a tree branch by turning it into a hare. How this transformation helped it escape the ice is up for debate, but apparently it continued to lay eggs it had no use for and decided to give them away in gratitude to the goddess. Makes a lot of sense, right? This myth has no basis in traditional German folktales. However, egg-laying rabbits are not the only weird things that crop up when spring comes knocking. In some Eastern European cultures, it was believed that supernatural occurrences were more likely during the Easter period. Vampires, in particular, were thought to rise up from the grave during Easter, instilling horror in the hearts of villagers. Protective measures, such as placing garlic and other talismans near homes and gravesites, were reportedly employed to ward off the undead, adding an eerie atmosphere to the Easter season. The failed revolutions of 1848 led to mass European migration to the US, proliferating these ideas throughout the English-speaking world. In 1874, a British Anglican priest paid young men 100 eggs if they could kill a hare before 10 a.m. on Easter Monday, reverberating the holiday's association with both fertility and sacrifice. Just a year later, Cadbury introduced chocolate eggs to the Easter tradition in Britain, and in 1878, President Rutherford B. Hayes invited children to roll Easter eggs at the White House after Congress forbade all playing on Capitol Hill, starting another long-running tradition. By 1903, British retailers were selling wooden eggs with toys inside for Easter, and in 1923, two Norwegian authors published a crime novel and promoted it at Easter with an advertisement that made it look like a real news story. This sparked the tradition of påskerom, or Easter crime, when Norwegians indulge in reading or watching crime stories, transforming the holiday into a time for thrilling whodunits and chilling mysteries. In 1950, a Pennsylvania department store set up a photo booth where children could have their picture taken with the famous Easter Bunny for $1. The following year, Here Comes Peter Cottontail by Gene Autry hit number 3 on the Billboard charts in the US, rounding out the convoluted history of our modern Easter traditions. We hoped you enjoyed this episode of the Dark History of Easter from History Made Simply. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next episode.